Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Leandra the TBR0, and my goal is to slowly but surely lessen my physical TBR one book at a time until I hit 0. I haven't done a video in quite some time, so this one's going to be playing a bit of catch up. I intend to discuss the books that I read back in October, as well as a few titles that I'm either reading currently in November or that I'm hoping to complete by the end of this month. I ended up completing 4 books in October, and it was an odd month for me. I actually participated in a lot of DNFing, which is something that we should normalize. It happens. If that's not for you and you want to push through, even if you're hating the book, that's fine. For me, I would rather end when I'm already sure that I'm not feeling it, and then maybe one day I'll pick that book up again, because it's not always the book's fault that you're not vibing with it. Sometimes it's what's going on in your own life, your own priorities, what your mood is, and the like. So the 4 books that I ended up finishing, it's kind of interesting. 2 of them are very similar in many ways, and I'll discuss those first. So the first book I ended up finishing in October was The Roman Hat Mystery by Ellery Queen. This was published in 1929, and Ellery Queen is a very well-known name when it comes to Golden Age detective fiction, especially if you're interested in the American sect. And there is an Ellery Queen magazine that's still published today, I believe, and it has gone on for decades and decades. I actually just picked up a few magazines from the 60s in my local secondhand shop for a few dollars each, and they are such a find. I'm so excited that I picked them up. I know my name's Leandra the TBR0, but I couldn't not take the opportunity to bring those home. So the one thing that some people might not know about Ellery Queen is that he is actually made up of a duo of writers. So he is the pseudonym for Manfred B. Lee and Frederick Dene. And these 2 gentlemen were cousins back in the day, which I think is very funny to know, because as we get into a synopsis of the Roman Hat Mystery, you will see another familial theme going on there. So what happens is there is this theatrical performance, and it's very dramatic. We have gunshots going off, people are screaming, they're dying on stage. It's very, very dramatic and eye-catching. At the same time, there is something going on in the audience, and a body is discovered. That body is Monty Field, a well-known crooked lawyer in New York City, and the police, everyone know that he's this crooked individual. They've just never really been able to find enough evidence to stick to him so that he could be prosecuted, but he is found dead, and there are so many mysterious instances going on. For instance, they aren't sure how he died and where the people who were supposedly sitting around him are, because clearly tickets were picked up, and yet no one is sitting in the seats surrounding him. And even more mysterious, according to our investigators, is that his top hat is missing. So during this time, when you're attending a theater, gentlemen were anticipated or expected to be wearing top hats. So when Monty's is missing, they're wondering what happened to it. Did the murderer remove it from the scene? If that's the case, why was this top hat so important? Was he murdered for the top hat, or did something else cause that individual to take the hat away? Our 2 leading investigators include father, Richard Queen, and his son, Ellery Queen. Richard Queen is the lead detective in the homicide squad of New York City, and his son is a bibliophile who often ends up joining him on investigations and helps him catch the culprits. And they have very different techniques. Ellery, being the bibliophile, oftentimes is an intellectual. He prefers to ruminate over thoughts and be very inquisitive in his investigation that way. He will pose hypotheses and try to see if they end up coming out in his favor, whereas Richard Queen is far more of a go-getter. He is someone who takes action and then likes to see what the results of that action are. He, of course, is involved in the interview process of many of his suspects, and he will divulge information just to see what their emotional reaction is. So while both queens end up taking a very different route towards the solution, they very much need each other in order to kind of pair clues together and finally figure out what actually happened to murder Monty Field. So In regards to the dynamic of these two characters, I really enjoyed it. I think that it was quite vibrant. I liked the differences between them, how they complemented each other, the fact that they're a father-son duo. I personally have never experienced that in detective fiction, Golden Age or otherwise. If you have, please leave in the comments what titles you know of that include this, because I'd be really interested to check them out. I wish that I loved this book more than I did, though, unfortunately, and it was dampened by the ending, which is quite disappointing for me because I have always been someone who is adamant that the ending oftentimes doesn't ruin the book for me. If it's predictable or if it's a bit far-fetched, if I enjoyed most of the book, then I am still known for giving the book a 3, 4, or 5-star review. And that's just my own personal opinion. However, this one ended up leaving a bad taste in my mouth because it has to do with something that just didn't age very well. I will put right here, spoiler warning, because I will be discussing certain elements. I won't be revealing who the murderer was, but I will be suggesting what their motivation for murdering Monty Field was, which may be a spoiler in your eyes. So please fast forward where this spoiler is gone, where that spoiler icon has disappeared. So throughout the book, there was already certain subtle and not so subtle racist sentiments going on in the book, and then when we finally have the reveal of who the murderer is and why they killed Monty Field, it's because blackmail is a very big influence in this entire book, and Monty Field was blackmailing this individual because they were mixed race, because they had white descent as well as black descent in their own bloodline, and if it were to be known that they also had black ancestors, then their entire lives would be ruined. And I was so frustrated with that. I know that happens, that's something that we often see in historical fiction. I've read a lot of books involving white passing scenarios and instances, which is totally fine, but just the way that it was designed and the sentiments from the characters about this person's struggle and why they felt that they need to do this. I don't know, it was a bit disappointing for me, and I just would have preferred it to be written in a different way, and also, if anything, not be written by these two obviously white authors discussing this type of situation. And I think that modern authors writing historical fiction during this time in regards to white passing are just much more artful, because obviously hindsight's 2020. We are far more progressive today, and we understand the struggle that it was to be someone of mixed race. We still have struggles today in regards to discrimination of someone who isn't being accepted by anyone who's attached to their background, whether you're partially white, partially black, or of any other person of color. So I don't know, I was just quite disappointed, and I just didn't really think it was that worth it of a read. So I ended up giving it 2 stars. That's my personal opinion. With that said, I probably will try Ellery Queen again, just to see if it is the ending that kind of left that bad taste in my mouth, because I did like the writing up until that point. Moving on, another book that's quite similar, the one I was referencing before, that I ended up finishing was Josephine Tey's The Man in the Queue. This is also the author's debut. I don't know if I referenced that for Ellery Queen, but that was his or their debut novel as well. And this was also published in 1929, interestingly enough. And on top of that, Josephine Tey is a pseudonym. And it's not even the pseudonym that this book was originally published under. The original pseudonym was Gordon Deviat, and this was written by Elizabeth McIntosh. After that publication, I believe that's when she ended up changing her pseudonym to Josephine Tey, and that's what we know her most well by. She is very well respected, and for good reason, in the detective fiction loving community. She's often discussed alongside other queens of crime like Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, Marjorie Allingham, Ngaio Marsh, and everyone else. So this was my first experience with Josephine Tey as well. I ended up borrowing this from the library. I didn't mention it before, but Ellery Queen's book, I ended up borrowing that from the library, and it was an audiobook through Hoopla, so highly recommend if you do have access to Hoopla and you do want to check it out. I found it that way, but I ended up having the physical library book for The Man in the Queue, and it also has this very interesting element of being involved with the theater in some way. So while Ellery Queen's murder happened within the theater during the performance, this one in The Man in the Queue actually happens in the queue leading into the theater. So in the West End, there is this performance that everyone and their mother wants to go to because it's coming to the end of their showing season, and the main actress, she is planning to go off to America. So this is the last time that many of us, at least those who are anticipating watching her, this will probably be one of the last performances that they get to watch where she is the lead. So the line is packed, people are shoving, pushing, and just before you get into the doors, a man collapses, and those surrounding him discover that he has been stabbed in the back. And so when Inspector Grant and the rest of the investigating team get brought onto the case, they again start to find some obscure aspects to the body, but in different ways to Monty Field. So while Monty Field was very well known, everyone almost immediately knew who it was that was murdered. This gentleman in the queue, in Josephine Tey's novel, is a mystery. His identity is unknown. There are no identifying ID or other type of documentation of who he might be on his body, and the only thing that is on his body is a revolver, and it hasn't been used. So people are wondering what's going on. The witnesses surrounding him supposedly didn't notice anything. They didn't really see him get stabbed. So they're immediately wondering what's going on. And it reminded me a bit of Agatha Christie's 450 from Paddington, because it's a multi-layered mystery. Not only do we need to figure out who murdered this man and why, but we also need to know who the man is. That's a huge part and a huge missing piece to the puzzle when we're trying to figure out what happened. And Inspector Grant is a really enjoyable detective. I really liked him. I liked that he is kind of a mix between the two detectives I just referenced, the Queens. He has elements of the armchair detective, where he is a big believer of letting the puzzle pieces kind of simmer in his mind. He likes his mind to wander and believes that that's a way for certain things to kind of click into place when he's not thinking so seriously about the case. But he's also a man of action. He is ready to be chasing down his culprit, his suspects, throughout the streets of London. He's ready to take a train to go figure out if someone has left the city to go out into hiding. So I really liked that dynamic, that he kind of was the best of both worlds. And I definitely want to try more of Josephine Tey in the future, and I'm actually already reading one of her books, which I will let you know which one it is once I get to the TBR aspect of this video. But I loved it. I thought it was super fun. The solution I found to be a bit difficult for anyone to realistically come up with on their own, but as I said, usually I don't mind that, and I didn't mind it in the least, so I gave Josephine Tey's The Man in the Queue 4 stars. Highly recommend it. Go check it out. See if your library has it. And then the next 2 books I ended up reading were intended for a reading vlog that I just didn't end up having the time to compile together, but I did end up reading the 2 books. And the first book I ended up reading for it was Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. This is a middle grade horror book, and it's a part of a series. So this was the first book in the series, and I loved it. I read it probably a week before Halloween, so I was already getting into the spooky feels. The atmosphere was perfect. It's during the autumn in Vermont, so we have, the leaves have changed, there are pumpkins, there's a bit colder weather going on, and it was lovely, and it was perfectly spooky. So the main character, Ollie, she's had quite a rough year. Her mother passed away last year, so nothing's really felt the same. Her motivation and passion for certain aspects of her life before her mother passed are just no longer something that she's interested in. She's no longer interested in making friends. She's kind of an outsider in her class, and she finds a way to escape through literature. And so when she happens upon this woman at the local swimming hole, making an effort to throw a book into the river to dispose of it, Ollie, without really thinking, ends up rescuing the book, grabs it from the woman's hands, and bikes off. And this woman is shouting hysterical things. She's crying. She's shouting out warnings to Ollie. And we soon begin to understand why this book is so feared by this woman. So as Ollie's reading it, it's about this tale from the 19th century. It's in epistolary form. So this woman is writing letters to her daughter explaining the events that went on. And the woman's husband ended up making a deal with this person who's described as the smiling man. And when you make a deal with the smiling man, you end up having to give in exchange something that none of us should be willing to give up, if you understand what I'm saying. So the next day, as Ollie is just immersed in this book, she thinks it's fictional, so she's enjoying it so much, and she's also kind of creeped out by it. There is a school trip to a local farm, and as they're at the farm, she realizes that the woman who's giving them the tour is that woman the day before who was hysterical about this book. And she begins to understand that those who are in this book have gravestones on the property. There are what are they? There are scarecrows everywhere. It's beginning to be a bit eerie. And as they're leaving, they get on the bus, they begin to head back to the school. The school bus breaks down and the fog is rolling in. For some reason, night seems to be entering far quicker than it should. And the bus driver begins to kind of give these ominous warnings saying, soon they'll come, you need to leave. And so Ollie ends up taking all of these signs for what they are, and she gets the heck out of Dodge. So she leaves the bus, and a few of her classmates end up joining her. And then they are just on this adventure, trying to escape these certain creatures that are trying to get them. And it's really fascinating how creepy it is at the same time as it being this found friendship story, because Ollie and her classmates are working together to find each other's weaknesses and help each other out. They support each other's strengths. And I really enjoyed the teamwork. And that's something I love about middle grade. I think it's too often that we find conflict within the group during very hectic situations, when it's like, in reality, can't we all just come together and support each other? Like, we already have an enemy that we're trying to either escape or defeat. So why are we already having conflict within the ranks of the good guys? So I really appreciated this book. I loved it so much. I own it, so and I can check that off of my TBR list. And eventually, maybe I will see if the library has the next books in this series. So if you're interested in something spooky still, even though October's over, but you're not really ready for YA or adult horror, I highly recommend Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. I gave it 5 stars. And finally, the 4th book that I ended up reading, which was meant to be affiliated with this reading vlog, was In Every Generation by Kendare Blake. I'm not sure if I'm saying this author's first name correctly, but this was a fascinating YA supernatural read. Again, I was getting into the October season, so I wanted to read something supernatural. And this was interesting because it's almost as if it's a spin-off or reimagining a next generation of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So I didn't grow up watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I did end up growing up watching Angel, which was the spin-off, if anyone remembers that. And so I was a bit worried that going into it, I wouldn't understand everything that was going on. I didn't know how much context the author would be willing to provide, and if I would understand every metafictional reference. And I have to say that Blake did a brilliant job. I think that she balances both types of readers, those who are avid fans, who really want the metafictional references, who want to re-immerse themselves into the Buffy the Vampire Slayer world, and it's also perfect for those who are new readers who would like to see what this franchise is about. And she provides enough background information for me to always understand the relationships between characters and the events that happened in generations past. So to give you a bit of a synopsis, we have Frankie, and she is an eco-witch. So her mother is Willow, who is known from the Buffy the Vampire Slayer universe, and during this time, Frankie is in high school. She's just trying to get by, and at the same time, there is this Slayer convention. So vampire slayers from all over the world, They are going to this convention to pass on ideas, to network, to share issues, and it happens every year and it's very secretive. But this time something goes wrong and there's a massive explosion and they aren't sure if any of the Slayers actually survived, and that includes Buffy, Faith, and the rest. So what happens next is that Frankie begins to change. She's starting to gain abilities that are associated with Slayers, which doesn't make sense because she's a witch and those are meant to remain separate. And now they're beginning to wonder if she is a Slayer, if she is becoming a Slayer witch, what does that mean? Does that mean that the rest of the Slayers are gone and she's now has on her shoulders the next generation and in trying to save the world? And because this explosion is very well known to the supernatural community, now demons and vampires and every other type of dark, dangerous creature are flocking to Sunnydale, a place that they were known for not going to because it's the home of Buffy. And so now Frankie has to play catch up because she's never trained for this, and yet now she has to actually defend her home and save the world at the same time. I loved this connection between older characters and new. We have a lot of characters that people who love the Buffy Vampire Slayer will very much recognize, Spike, Willow, and others, and they are taking this next generation of Slayers under their wing, and that includes Frankie and her friends who are supporting her. They're doing their best to also save their town, and it's often referenced as a new Scooby kind of gang, these Scoobies working together, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the mixtures of different franchises, and it was really action-packed while also being very self-referential, very aware of how humorous certain events are. I loved the dialogue. The dynamic between the characters were great. And yeah, I very much am looking forward to book number 2, which apparently comes out in January 2023. And I hope that my local library gets it because that's where I got the first one. And it was such a fun ride. Highly recommend. That also got 5 stars from me. Okay, I am worried that this is going to be a much longer video than I anticipated. So here we are, moving on to the second half, which is going to be my November TBR. So I'm just going to be rattling them off pretty quickly because I'm sure some people are nodding off. I appreciate you if you have lasted this long. But currently I am reading Daughter of Time, which is another book by Josephine Tey. I didn't even realize when I picked it up that I was moving from the first book to one of the last books that Josephine Tey wrote, which is quite interesting when you're really thinking about an author's career. But this one is packed with historical references because it's an investigation of a very cold case, old crime, centuries ago. And I'm learning a lot about just English and British history in general, and I'm reading it with my friend Carly. I'll put her link here because she's also a YouTuber. I highly recommend that you check her out because she is great, and she is also someone who tends to read a mixture of everything. But we're reading this together, and I'm sure she's much farther than me because we were kind of supposed to be reading this in October, and I think we're both just taking our time with it because it's a history that both of us as Americans just aren't as familiar with. So it's been interesting, but I'm currently reading that. I'm also reading Murder After Christmas by Rupert Latimer. That's a NetGalley arc. That's why I'm reading something Christmassy so soon in the season, and it was published in 1944. I'm really enjoying it so far. It's got that feel of during war times as well because it is during World War II, and the characters are anticipating this man's death, but it seems that even though they're anticipating it the entire time, when he finally does die, they're in chaos and they don't really understand who murdered him, why they did what's going on. So I'm really kind of enjoying that. And it's very humorous as well. This author Latimer, he is totally cool with making jokes throughout, just like referencing murder and it being ha ha ha, and I really enjoy that. Other books on the horizon that I'm hoping to read, and I haven't started them yet, include The Hollow of Fear by Sherry Thomas. This is the 3rd book in the Lady Sherlock series. I've just been craving it. I think it's because it's been rainy and cold, and we're finally kind of getting into close to winter season, so I want to get back into the 19th century London and see what's going on with Lady Sherlock and her friends. I also am finally hoping to read Death and the Conjurer. This is a historical fiction mystery, I believe in the 1930s, and Tom Mead, he's the one who's an expert on John Dixon Carr, and he actually dedicates the book to John Dixon Carr, I believe, and it focuses on a magician, impossible crimes. Very, very much excited for that. I'm also hoping to finally read Miss Aldridge Regrets by Louise Hare. This one is another historical fiction mystery that's during the Jazz Age. We've got a main character, amateur sleuth, who's a woman of color. It's a transatlantic mystery as well, so I'm really looking forward to that. And finally, Peril at the Exposition. This is by Nev March. This is another library book, if you can tell. I ended up reading the first book, Murder in Old Bombay. Loved it so much. It is such a slow burn historical fiction, really rich in detail mystery, that one. So I really hope that this is the same. Instead of being set in India, though, it's set in Chicago, which is going to be very interesting. And it's the second book. It's going to be picking up right after the first one, and I'm really looking forward to it because it also has people of color as the investigators, which we just don't often see in historical fiction, or we don't see in detective fiction written during the time. And so I think historical fiction mysteries are a great way to get the diversity that we unfortunately didn't have because it was predominantly white people writing during that time, and they were of course writing about white people. So those are my hopefuls. I'm sure I'll be throwing in a few other Christmassy reads as well because we're getting close to December and I almost want to have a bit more time because I felt like I was rushing myself during the spookies of October. So I would love to know what you read in October. What are you currently reading in November? Are there any books that you are really hoping to read by the end of the year? Because it's coming to a close soon. 2023 is just around the corner. So thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like, consider subscribing, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks everybody. Bye!